want to welcome everyone to the Temple of Understanding's Eco-Justice for All Dialogue series. I'm Allison Van Dyke. I'm Chair and Executive Director of the Temple of Understanding. This series is an ongoing program of the Temple of Understanding, a 61-year-old interfaith organization whose mission is to bring world religious leaders and actors together to address world problems. Our focus for the past 11 years has been on climate change, environmental awareness, and advocacy, both in our youth and adult programming, and as an NGO at the United Nations. Today, it is my honor to introduce our three wonderful speakers. Dr. Erin Lothes is a theologian at St. Elizabeth University, Morristown, New Jersey. She's an author of Inspired Sustainability, Planting Seeds for Action, and is co-author of many articles and books on faith-based environmentalism. Imam Saffet Catovic is founding member of the Islamic Society of North America's Green Initiatives, and he has recently been appointed head of the Islamic Society of North America's Washington, D.C. office. Reverend Henrik Grape is a senior advocate on care for creation, sustainability, and climate justice for the World Council of Churches, and was a member of the World Council of Churches delegation that attended COP26. Thank you all for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Allison. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today and with my colleagues, Dr. Grape and Dr. Catovic. It's wonderful to have the chance to talk together as we ponder a way into the future after the COP at Glasgow. As you mentioned, I'm a theologian. I represent the Catholic tradition, and we certainly had a lively presence there by bringing the petitions calling for a healthy planet, healthy people by over 130,000 Catholics around the world, bringing our divestment announcements, sharing a new film, which I'm very excited to talk about, and also being present at demonstrations outside the COP, calling for more action, more attention to Indigenous and human rights, and an immediate transition to a sustainable future. So there's lots of work to be done, and I look forward to our conversation today. I will pass it over to Imam Catovic.
And I will pass it over to my dear brother, Reverend Henrik, and I'm going to listen to his wonderful words, and then shall share with you, God willing, a few words after that. Thank you so much, Erin.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Yes, I'm Henrik, based in Sweden, working for World Council of Churches. I've been to COP since 2006, all of them except one. And this Glasgow was a special experience, and I would like to have some discussion and see what you have picked up on what happened in Glasgow. Just as a start, I would say that I'm happy that we still have this multilateral scene, that we actually can come together and do some work on climate change. Of course, you can always be skeptic to what come out of the COPs. I think that this COP delivered on some parts, but didn't deliver as much as we needed to. But at least it showed that the Paris Agreement are still alive. We are still also in reach of 1.5 degrees, and I think that is something very important. And from the faith communities, I see lots of improvement in our work together, and I'm very happy to share that also later with you. But so far, I think that also that the importance of faith communities in COP and on climate change is more important now than ever before. So I will stop there and give the word to Erin again. Or Saffet, whoever.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Erin, Dr. Henrik, for the wonderful intro you shared, and looking forward to our conversation as follows. Your brother in faith and creation, Imam Saffet Catovic, not yet a doctor, still working on it, Dr. Erin, didn't get there yet, but good Lord willing, and the creek Lord rise, I'll get there. As they say here. I'm coming to you from my home, as we're all coming to from our homes and places of residence. My home is in central New Jersey, and that's the traditional ancestral lands, unceded lands of the Lenape peoples. And I think one of the big items that I'd like to have conversation about was the incredible presence of all sorts of wonderful people at one of the two COPs. And you know, the COP took place in England, and it's sort of the tale of the place of the Tale of Two Cities, right? Charles Dickens novel. And I think there's a Tale of Two COPs. And I know that one of those COPs was well attended by many people who were exemplifying their greenness because they were hanging out in the green zone, and many other people who maybe needed to exemplify that greenness a lot more. They were hanging out in the blue zone, and the two zones didn't meet. And I think that's the tale of two COPs. And so I really like to hear about the People's COP. I know our brother Henrik was right there on the ground in the midst of all of the action, and looking forward to hearing more about that. And you know, sharing collectively on reflections as to what was done, what needed to be done. I mean, this is almost 30 years of COPs, and the clock is ticking. 2050 is no longer the target year. 2040 from the IPCC report is a target year to get 1.5 to stay alive as reachable. But it seemed to me quite a few of the major polluters were saying we're going to extend it to 2060, 2070, 2080 in terms of their statements. So looking forward to this conversation, and thank you for the opportunity to be with all you. God bless, and God help our Mother Earth through the good work and of righteous people, especially our indigenous brothers and sisters throughout the world, as they defend Mother Earth against the various attacks against her, and therefore threaten the life of ourselves and also future generations. Thank you.
If I may jump in, I'd like to ask both of you where you see the most hope for your faith communities in leading transformational action in these next months. All of us are part of movements within our own traditions and also interfaith coalitions. Do you see the most hope in more of the same kind of work done more intensely, done more publicly, now that climate change is really more in the forefront, even for the average person? Or do you foresee new kinds of engagement and activism?
I can start to pick on that. Yes, as I said before, I think that faith communities is a crucial part to actually come to terms with climate change because of the urgency to act. And we need that kind of driving forces that faith traditions do have. What the climate discussion has been very much based on what can be achieved from political side, and what are the techniques and the science. And of course the science is important, the political decisions are important, but the sort of the urgency also need a value-driven way of understanding the urgency. And we have, and I think that faith communities is one of those important players to actually to make people understand the urgency, but also to have the values that are not monetary values, that are other values of compassion, of love, of justice, of all those values that we have in our tradition, to abstain from something for the most vulnerable. And I think we have all those narratives that is so needed to get this transformation that we are standing in front of. So I see lots I have lots of hope that when we understand this and pick in our different faith traditions. I also want to take up what Saffet said about the indigenous people, because I see them as a kind of key for the understanding of the interdependence that all the indigenous people all over the world gives us. And we need to reconnect to that interdependence again. And I think that is something that faith communities is also good at. On a more sort of practical level, I hope that the call for divestment will be much stronger. So all of those faith communities, and I see that faith communities is one of the big actors when it comes to to divestment, to see that you actually need to take all the money out of the fossil fuel business. And I think that is something we have done before, and we should be more loudly talking about that. Another thing that I also been involved in is to make ecocide, to have an international law on ecocide. We have gathered faith leaders from all traditions, from my Swedish friends, and we've done it during the COP as well. Also a way of raising the awareness of how we relate to the ecosystems. So I think that is on this side, I think we have much to do, and I think we have to step up this work also, showing by example, but also get the narratives to get us out of this fossil fuel dominated last century development model to something new. And we haven't done this before, so we have to build a road while we go walk it. So I think that is something that we all should share and think of. And also from an interface perspective, just want to mention this. I just have to mention, we had an interfaith dialogue, Talanoa dialogue at the start of the COP. And this was the first time I really felt this is true interfaith. We were in a synagogue, and I think it's good for me as a Christian that is normally we've been in churches, but this time we were in a synagogue, and that was where I was very happy for that. We had all the different traditions coming there. We have breakout sessions, and we actually made a call on. I can share it in the chat afterwards. From all the different breakout sessions and the groups, and I think it's very powerful to see it. And we also had a kind of a service together where we prayed from our different traditions, and I think that is very powerful to see also. And I really hope that this interfaith dialogue on climate change will also be a very important step for the future. So I leave it there, and Saffet, I give it to you.
Erin, do you want me to chime in, or would you like to go?
Please jump in, Saffet.
Okay, feet first. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we're all here as members of various faith communities, and I think it's so important, and the role of faith communities has been so important. I think about, for example, the Paris Agreement, which we're trying to keep alive, as our dear brother Henrik pointed out to. But when he was speaking about staying alive, if you're speaking about a hospital type of setting, there's the ICU, intensive care units, which someone is on the verge of death. And there's also sort of the other units where you just go in for a day type of procedure and then you go home. And I think we're not far from the ICU, if not in the ICU, with regard to the Paris Agreement. And what needs to be done and keeping it alive. And we can discuss details of that as we go on. But one of the things I recall, and this is sort of my looking at it, what made the timing of the Paris Agreement so different than what happened in previous years? Climate change was happening, environmental devastation and habitat destruction was happening, fossil fuel burning was taking place. Various environmental groups had done incredible work over the years to document this, to agitate, to rally support for it. Scientists were speaking about this for quite a few years. What made it different? And what comes to mind is the People's Climate March. What comes to mind is the release for the first time of various faith communities in quick succession with one another. Of course, most famous was the release of Laudato Si, which I know our sister Erin has done a lot of work on. And these statements in which religious communities, and this is sort of my summarizing of it, basically said it is sinful, it is against God's will that human beings continue to do what they're doing. For the longest time, faith communities have dealt with the effects of climate change. We are the first responders. Our churches, our mosques, our synagogues, our temples are the places of safety and security when the extreme weather events hit. That's where people go to find shelter, to find food, to find protection, to find pastoral care. We're very much aware of the effects of climate change because we are part of those first responders that help to mediate it, help to repair, help to heal those who are the victims of it. But in before the climate change, before the Paris Agreement, faith communities began to speak up. And I think that through their various religious institutions and organizations, and I think that was a critical game changer, because that moral framework was not present there before, in the sense of sharing with peoples of faith around the world. And most peoples around the world continue to identify as being members of various faith traditions and religious and spiritual communities, to basically say it is no longer okay, according to our teachings and according to God's beneficence and love and mercy, that we continue to do what we're doing. This is, to use, and I'll sort of dovetail this into our sister Erin's maybe conversation, it is sinful. It is a sin against God. It is a sin against creation. It is a sin against God for us to continue this. And I think that that's one of the things that I was inspired by. And I think that the presence of faith communities in a much more active and direct role, even more so than before, in the coming together in the spirit of cooperation that is unprecedented, I think, in the history of human relations. Religions are often blamed for conflict, for pain, for suffering, or somehow either initiating it or not taking steps quick enough to allow it to come to an end. But in this case, religions are at the forefront, and the religious communities and spiritual communities, of calling out a common threat to human existence and working together in ways that they have not done so before to actualize a change, recognizing that it's such an immense challenge that it requires all of us to work together. And in the process, beginning to learn from each other. We learn through working together. As Reverend Henrik said, we learn while we're doing, because we haven't chartered this course before. It's beyond dialogue. It's a question of mutual coexistence, mutual existence, period. And it's something I think that I'm very, very proud of. I was very hopeful when it comes to the COP, of what I mentioned at the beginning, the tale of two COPs. I'm very hopeful in what I would call the People's COP, that which took place in the Green Zone, and that which was very much infused with the presence of religious folk, religious leaders, speaking about their faith traditions in various types of settings, in each other's places of worship, and outside in God's place of worship, the natural world, and speaking it in such clear language. So I'm very hopeful for the People's COP. I have a lot of doubts still as to what's going to happen inside the official COP. Way back when I started my political activism during the Bosnian War, as a member of the Bosnian delegation to the United Nations, and also in Bosnia itself during that horrific time when never again happened again, I got accustomed to, and I forget who told it to me, so I'm not going to be able to give proper attribution, the idea of politics and diplomacy, and there's a lot of quotes about it. But one of the things that I remember, one of the statements that I remember, it's the act of doing without doing and saying without saying. That's the problem. That's the core of the problem. Many words were said, but the language that was said is not being followed. And the language that was said was not sufficient to meet the challenges if we are going to save this planet for ourselves, our children, future generations, and all of God's blessed creation. It's all yours, Sister Erin, Dr. Erin.
Thank you, Saffet. And I think you're right. There was such a power of human and spiritual energy unleashed before the Paris Accord by so many religious statements, by Laudato Si, by others, and of course by the People's March, which I'm sure so many on this call were at. I remember at its conclusion talking to our common friend Fletcher Harper, Executive Director of Green Faith, and hearing that 400,000 people attended. That was phenomenal. We had hoped for 100,000. It was just an outpouring of outrage and love and insistence that a change happen. And that message was heard, and it it echoed, I think, in Paris. And as we think now, how do we continue to support our followers with a narrative that is nourishing and sustaining and inspiring? We have so many challenges. This theme of two COPs, it's really telling, not just between the people in the protest versus those who are officially carrying out the politics, but possibly and painfully within our own faith communities. I know my faith community is terribly riven by polarization. We do not have unanimity on a shared commitment to prioritize climate change as the moral crisis of our era. And how do we get there? How do we get there? What is the narrative that will engage, maybe not everybody, maybe pragmatically, one sector of that community may never come along, but how do we engage the hesitant middle? And how do we do it from a moral stance? We know that talking about a positive future, a beautiful future, is necessary. We can't talk about the gloom and doom while we have to acknowledge the urgency and insist upon immediate action. So how do we bring in the reality from technologies that are currently available, that we know this is possible, that we know we can build a beautiful new world, and share that and make it meaningful so that we engage people as much as possible. And I couldn't agree with you more, Henrik, about the crisis of divestment and the need to accelerate that. And here too, I think the narrative needs to be framed carefully, because for so many people, that's alarmist rhetoric. And for those who are open to it, they're already open to it. They have to do the hard work of detangling themselves from a system which has tentacles throughout everything. But how do we make this rhetoric, this narrative of divestment inviting to a wider range? Because we must engage them.
I can try to answer that question, because I have been talking divestment, and just for you to know, I come from a church in Sweden who started in the divestment in 2008 already, and totally divested in 2014. So we have a long history of it. And when we talk to people about what happened in our church, people say, yeah, but we have to look at our members. These are members' money. They have to be good returns on. But we say on a moral base, you really have to do this, because you see the fossil fuel companies, what they are doing is affecting the climate. And I also say we cannot go out in advocacy for climate justice and at the same time put our investments in fossil fuel industry. And I say, well, it's a hard thing to do, and we have this blah 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 discussion. To quote Greta Thunberg from Sweden as well, there's much blah blah blah. But when I say, actually, the returns have been better than average in many years since we totally divested. And then I say, that sounds interesting. And to me, that is hypocrisy, because you should start already directly. But if you really need that, the monetary value argument is there too. So there's no discussion. You should put your money where your mouth is, so to say. So I think that's for faith communities. This is a no-brainer. The next step is, where do we put our assets from rich churches? Where do we have them? What pressure can we put on our banks that we use for salaries that we pay out, and ask them, where do you have your investments for your bank? That is another question that you actually can put on them, to ask them how much of fossil fuel industry is from your banks in your bank system, so to say. So I think that is one part that I think it's an easy way to go further, especially in affluent countries, in rich countries. This is something that all churches should bring up on the table. I think that's something we have to do. But how do we get the narrative when we really want to say, this is good, this is actually a better life than we have now? Because everybody thinks you have to sort of leave a good life to get into a very gloom and doom life. But if you change the perspective and change the narrative to say, actually, especially during COVID, we have learned what is important for us and what is not. And many of those things that we think are so important for us, they are not. So it could also be a kind of narrative change to say we have to lead this fossil fuel consumption society because we will have a much better society in the future and more sustainable, and everybody will be more happy. And also, I would like to bring in that justice perspective. I just learned from one of the insights from Johan Rockström from Potsdam Institute. He said, as number 5, the insight was the importance of a just transition. And he said that the 1% richest of the world, they have to lower their impact by 30 times. And at the same time, the 50% of the world's poorest people, they can actually higher their emission at the same time and keep the 1.5 degree. So this is the we that we discuss who have to do their homework is actually the rich people of the world. And I think I am one of them. And I think many of you in this session also know that we are a part of the rich world, and we are the ones who really have to change. And that is something that we have to come back to again and again. What kind of society do we create? How much of ecological footprint do we take from the rest of the world? So I think that is the eco-justice and the just transition is something that we have to address also from the faith communities.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I fully agree. Fossil fuel divestment is the key. That which undergirds the current economic systems of the world, which is the unjust parts of it, is definitely fueled by fossil fuels. And it's something that we as individuals in our lifestyle choices, but as our nations as well, need to step away from. That's the major driver of greenhouse gas emissions, which in turn is a major driver of climate change. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I think one of the challenges is, of course, to detox ourselves from a life that has been very much driven by reliance on fossil fuels. And detoxification is something that religious communities are also supposed to be good at, right? We're supposed to be able to help people step away from intoxicating behaviors, be it through alcohol abuse or other types of abuse, and to lead them through various processes towards a more healthier, more wholesome lifestyle. And so I think that's something that's very much on the agenda. The Islamic Society of North America in 2016 became the first national Muslim organization in any country around the world to divest from fossil fuels. And announce this divestment took a couple of years to finalize that. I think I was with Dr. Erin in Marrakesh when that announcement was made. If I remember correctly, we were at the COP together there. And I'm not sure if you were there. I think you were there as well, Henrik. Yes, so we were there together. So the announcement is of course the first step. The second step is acting upon it. And fossil fuel production and those who were involved in the financing of the fossil fuel industry were amongst those who were allowed in the blue zone other than governmental representatives. So it was something that I found very interesting. They had the VIP access, the various CEOs of these companies, whereas many other peoples of faith, and all the wonderful people who were able to finally get into Glasgow were denied even the opportunity to meet with those. Those who were impacted most, voices were not allowed to be in the room where the discussions were being taken with regard to how the world should decide their futures. And it's something that I always reflect upon. And many of the oil producing nations, the United States, by the way, my country here in America is the #1 producer of oil in the world. Some of you may not know that. But some of the nations also, of course, from the Gulf area. And within Muslim circles, it has been extremely challenging because there has been a lot of humanitarian benefit and a lot of philanthropic work that has been done as a result of the profits that have come from oil production and fossil fuel extraction. So it's been extremely challenging on various fronts for the Muslim communities to rise up to the responsibility, and especially the Muslim scholars. And that's why I was so happy in 2019 when one of the more well-known councils of Islamic scholars in the world, the Fiqh Council of North America, the Council of Islamic Jurists here in America, was able to come up with the religious formulation or framework in which fossil fuel divestment becomes a matter of one's fulfilling one's religious obligations according to Islam's sacred law, and that just transition to renewable futures through investment of a part of that, funds that have been divested, as well as other funds in renewable clean energy solutions, becomes a way forward. And so it's not only the divest portion, it's also the invest portion. We have to invest portion. And that invest portion, as Reverend Henrik pointed out, has its monetary payoff. Production of energy from renewable sources is 100% not only cleaner, but it is also financially beneficial. It is less expensive to produce per energy unit energy from renewable sources than it is from the fossil fuel industry. And so it's something that we have to sort of be willing to confront. And here in the United States, we've had for the recent period, the action of what is termed as the People versus Fossil Fuels campaign. It is led, understandably so and justifiably so, by the indigenous peoples, by the First Nations peoples, who are hit first and worst by these situations and who are defending and becoming the protectors, and are the protectors, as they have been for centuries, of Mother Earth, and especially of water and other resources, natural resources, which we all, and gifts of God, which we all benefit from. They literally laying their lives on the line to protect that. Many of the fossil fuel pipelines run across reservoirs for water. That water provides us the ability to live throughout many parts of the country. And similar situation is true in other areas. So I very much this active movement towards fossil fuel divestment. I think it's now over $30 trillion, if I remember correctly. And many of the institutions and organizations that are leading this and foundations are actually religious foundations and institutions. And that's something which we should be proud of, but say some actions have been done, but a lot more need to be taken. The last thing I just want to mention is the idea of just transition. And this is sort of a play on words, but it's also a policy that's out there. The question is, what type of energy mix do we need for the future? So there's different phrases being kicked around, and many on this call, I'm sure, are more knowledgeable than myself. Net zero, carbon neutral, fossil free. Fossil free is the one we're aiming for. No carbon emissions is what we should aim for. And someone says these things are impossible, we need a mix. Well, here in the States, way back in the day, not too long ago, we had a president called John F. Kennedy, who said when there was no possibility of it, we're going to do the moonshot. We're going to try to go to the moon. And guess what? It happened. We can shoot for the moon. We can do this if we work together on it, and if we continue to stand strong and stand together. Just transition doesn't mean just stay in transition. It means move from one location to another where you don't go back to the previous location. No more fossil fuels. They have to stay in the ground. And last thing about justice, which our brother Henrik mentioned, I just want to chime in on that. When I was looking through the final wording of the document from COP, there was a statement there, and I'm going to read it in the introductory page. It says, and it uses, of course, diplomatic speak. It says, notes the importance of the concept of climate change for some people. No, climate justice is for all people and for future generations. It's not for some. It's not a side effect or a side purpose of what we're trying to do. For me, as a Muslim, justice is central to my working in the world. God commands justice, and I know this is echoed in similar traditions. And in fact, the link is between justice and love in our tradition is said, what is justice in the public sphere? Justice in the public sphere is love. Love is not a word. love is a deed. And I think that our other traditions, faith traditions, spiritualities reflect this. And so we need to make sure that climate justice is front and center, not for some people, it's for all people. As we like to say in the States, you know, climate, extreme weather events that are associated with climate change do not discriminate according to your zip code. What happens according to your zip code means the very well-to-do and the not so well-to-do. And people spend a lot of money trying to make sure they have the right zip code when they receive mail. Is that it allows those with certain zip codes to be able to somehow mediate the effects of climate change a little bit better than others, but that's not going to last forever. That's going to change relatively quickly. So I know I talked more than I should have, but thank you for allowing me to share, and I'll look forward to listening to my sister and my brother talk further, and the conversation that's going to, all of you have a chance to converse with us, and we converse with you shortly. Thank you. Sister, Dr. Erin.
Well, thank you, Saffet. You're so right that justice and moving forward in a transition that gets us somewhere, that gets us to the world we want to live in, is what this is all about, as urgently as possible. I mean, that transition has really to happen within very few years. One report from Oxford says within 3 years, we need to radically, 2025, bring down our consumption, because the available fossil fuels that exist in proven assets are so great. We cannot use all the ones that exist. We certainly cannot extract for prospect for more. So we need to accelerate that downscaling right away. And we have to build a new society so that we have energy based on other sources, that we have regenerative agriculture, that we have sustainable policy practices in our families and communities. All of this is needed. And so I'd like to quickly share something that comes from the Vatican and is based on the Laudato Si encyclical, which was mentioned, and that is the Laudato Si action plan. The Laudato Si action plan is a template, it's a blueprint for the future that has been developed by the Vatican, and it is a guide for all sectors of my church. And it is just been rolled out publicly and is now available for people to use as guidelines for their own communities. It includes action plans so that it is actively giving people a way to plan their proposals for how to build more sustainable lives. And that would be in their families, that would be in their churches, that would be among religious communities, that would be among other institutions. So just to give you a quick notion of it, can you see my screen that says, what is the Laudato Si action plan? Okay, great. It's an action-oriented 7-year ecological conversion journey in the spirit of ecological ecology. And it is a very comprehensive plan designed for 7 sectors of the church: families, parishes and dioceses, educational institutions, both elementary schools, universities, all kinds of institutions, hospitals and healthcare centers, the economy as a whole. It aims to support the transformation of the economy as a whole, organizations and groups, and religious orders. So it is a very comprehensive plan sponsored by the Vatican Dicastery for Integral Ecology. And the movement I represent, the Laudato Si Movement, assists with facilitation of this. It has multiple goals, but what I think is really interesting and helpful is that it includes plans for people, communities, parishes, families to actively engage in this. So it's a very global and comprehensive vision for seeding that transformation, which we certainly need so drastically. And hopefully we'll have many, many partners in our communities from all the faith communities who are our neighbors in this task. One other thing I want to mention is again the critical need for divestment, how we have to continue to call that out in all of the ways that we put money into institutions, because that's where the opposition lies, and that's where the money is going that is influencing our congressional representatives. And this is why we have blockages in forward progress. We need to cut that connection drastically. So I'll turn it back over to Reverend Henrik.
Thank you, thank you. I'm very inspired to hear all this, and I know about this action plan. I think that is very ambitious, but it's also good that you actually have plans for what you want to do. So it's not just words. You actually help congregation and people to act on these things, because I mean, climate change is not just about fossil fuels. It's not just about consumption patterns. It's not just about lifestyles. It's not just about what we eat. It's all, everything is included in this, and we need some guidance to take us forward in this. So I'm happy to see all this that's happening. I think what I would like to see, that we from the faith communities could actually put some questions to our context wherever we are. What is really needed? What do we see? How do we plan? I mean, if you have plans for the future, what do they look like? Because we have like 7-8 years to actually curb the emissions. They're still rising. How do we do this? How do we challenge our societies? I think many things can actually happen in a short time. Just the example of Greta Thunberg that you have heard of. I was actually in a meeting before it started, and we have discussion. How do you get youth into discussion on climate change? How do we get them more engaged? And we were a couple of people who've been into environment in Sweden for many years and think we can do this and that. And some of those in that meeting went to meet with some young Swedish girls in a school to talk, how can you do this? And one of them was Greta Thunberg. And she was so annoyed by nothing happened. So she just got out of the Zoom call, pulled out of it. And then she said to her parents that I would like to go on strike outside the parliament before there was an election in 1 month. And the parents said, no good idea, no good idea. And the friend said, no good idea, but she did it anyway. And I mean, you know, the rest of the story is that she sat there alone for the first day, and there was some other young people coming there, and to the history is also that she had this malfunction, psychological health that she also had some struggle with. And she this was something that she came over, but she started eating, she started communicating this, and suddenly you have lots of people following this, and just in some months everybody know what the Fridays for Future was about. And I think that is a really wake-up call, because she said just the same thing that we have said from the World Council of Churches and from other religious communities, just the same thing that we have done for many, many years. But suddenly this was reaching out. And I think that is something also that we should have some faith in what we are doing, and what we have. Some of us have been in this movement for many, many years and been to COPs and been disappointed. I think I see that we are in a tipping point also from that aspect, that we actually can achieve much more today than I thought was possible 15 years ago. We are closer to do something today, and but we still have to push as much as we can and challenge ourselves, challenge our faith communities, challenge our local authorities and national government and multilateral stages like COPs are. From my opinion, I often say that hope, because people say, do you have any hope? And I say, yes, I have hope, but that kind of hope that some say Saint Augustine said once. He said that hope do have two beautiful daughters. One is called anger over the way things are, and the other is courage to actually do something about it. And that kind of hope is something I take with me in this climate struggle. We have to look this right in the face. This is very problematic, and feel the kind of anger about where we are, but also have the courage to do something about it. And I think that kind of hope is that we need to actually go further on this struggle to come to a better future for all people of the earth, and especially from have an intergenerational justice aspect of what we do today.
Well, amazing.
Henrik, I wanted to give time to the audience to raise questions on behalf of the organizers, on behalf of Alison Van Dyke and Susie Mazzoli. I ask anyone who has questions, please paste them in the chat. And I'm so sorry, Brother Saffet, I cut you off. While we are collecting some questions, over to you.
No problem. I was just saying amazing to Henrik's analysis, Brother Henrik's analysis. I think, going back to the tale of two COPs and the People's COP, I think one of the observations that was made, and I really like to see a detailed demographic study on this, that the 100,000 that was there in the cold weather that you braved, in the rain and the winds on Saturday, in the streets, was incredibly populated by the young people, by the youth. And I think from what I read, those inside were a bunch of old white men that were primarily the ones who were inside the COP, especially the lobbyists and the other folks that were allowed inside the blue zone. So it's like a tale of two COPs. And I'm hopeful for the future based on the fact that the younger people were there. A couple of weeks ago, we had a protest and a rally in front of the Capitol Hill and the Supreme Court, led by Reverend Barber of the Poor People's Campaign. And the leading participants in that were folks from the Sunrise Movement, some of our younger people from the Sunrise Movement. And they were actually on a hunger strike. I'm saying they're putting their lives on the line. One of the sisters that was on the hunger strike was from Long Island, the Hempsteads. That's the place that the well-to-do and the rich and famous go to play. And she was there, and she was on her 7th day of the hunger strike. And when Reverend Barber asked her, what are you doing this for? You have everything. What are you doing this for? She publicly stated, I want to live. That is a very strong and powerful message. I want to live. And I think Greta Thunberg articulated that wonderfully. And thanks to our Church of Sweden for coaxing her along the way. I'm going to give some credit to you all. But as first time as someone who's participated in diplomacy for many years at the UN, which is also sometimes known as a talk shop, and people go there to act upon as sort of on a stage on behalf of their governments, to have someone point their finger and tell everybody, shame on you. All the diplomatic protocol went out the window and people were silent. World leaders were silent and they had to listen. That gives me hope. That gives me hope. We just got to keep the pressure on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. There are so many things in my head right now. So it's the different COP. Just to say that this COP and the demonstration, this was the first COP at the demonstration on the streets where we see a special faith block, and it was big. And normally we are scattered around. There are some Laudato Si Movement here, and there are some WCC, there are some ACT Alliance, there are some Buddhists, but this time we were all together. And I think that was huge for me. And it really was amazing to see that different faiths actually went together. And also for this, I say we have a great web side event with Islamic Relief and Church of Sweden on gender and climate change. I think that is very positive to see that we can actually go together on doing side events together. We had good discussion with the Buddhist community. We shared a press conference with the Buddhists from the Interfaith Liaison Committee. And I see there are so much things moving forward when it comes to the faith communities. For those progressive, I would say, in the different faiths, we have so much in common, and we can do so much more together when we have our voices together. And also, I think more often I also hear from those middle or gray-haired men in the blue zone with suits on. Even from them, you can hear them refer to faith leaders as a part of the discussion on climate change. So I think it's sort of trickling into these discussions as well. So for me, I'm not that disappointed at this COP as I have been before. I'm not happy about it, but I see that we can actually move. There are lots of resistance from states. I mean, next COP will be in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and the next after that will be in one of the Gulf states. So we will have lots to do with the fossil fuel business in the discussion of the COPs coming in the future. But we see that we actually talk about 1.5 degree, not 2 degrees anymore. And if you want to be generous to the discussion, you can say, if people actually do what they say they want to do, if they actually want to achieve 1.5, and what have been the pledges now, we can actually come to 1.9, 1.8. So from Paris 2.7, maybe today 2.4, with a generous interpretation, we can come 1.8. We are getting closer to actually get to the moon, so to say, to get under 1.5. There will be lots of stress in the ecosystem also at 1.5. But it's much better than going to 2.4 or 2.7 or to even beyond that. So I have some hope actually to see that this can be done. But we as faith communities must bring our voices and our narratives.
There's a question in the chat from Martin and Pilley that asks, should the phrase right relationship be used much more frequently in our conversation about climate? We are so distracted by our possessions that we forget about love. And I would say that certainly is central to the view that living sustainably on the planet begins with an eco-conversion that's grounded in our relationship with God, our relationship with our neighbors, and our relationship with our fellow creatures, all of it flowing from the creation by a God of love. So that is certainly the case. How that's maybe a uphill push against a consumerist and throwaway culture, but it is where we need to go.
I can use one of my sound bites that I have used now and then, and people tend to remember it. It said, in every room where you make decisions, you should have 3 empty chairs, and those 3 empty chairs should represent the poor people of the world, the coming generation, and the creation itself, because all those aspects needed when you take the decisions. And too often it's industry, it's economic growth that is in the discussions, and you seem to forget those with no voices. And those 3 empty chairs to remind us you need to have this perspective on the big decisions that you take today.
Yeah, I think that's critical. One of the ways I would suggest that people might begin to document, if they're not already doing that, is we have this concept here in the States of New Year's resolutions. I don't know how much it plays out in Europe, but sort of make resolutions, you sort of write down a commitment. And the characteristic of resolutions is people sort of abandon them after the first month. But I think when we're speaking about the future, we can make a resolution with regard to how we'll do this. And there's different ways you can do that. I'm going to put out a plug for Living the Change. It's one of the projects of Green Faith and other communities, a lot allied groups, both here and in Europe, that allows people to say, let me see what my actual carbon impact is with regard to things that I can change, especially in the northern countries. We have the ability to affect what we consume, where we get it from, what type of food we eat. So diet is important. It's something I can change on a daily basis. 3 times a day, we interact with the earth. We need to set the relationship right with the earth. Secondly is home energy consumption. That's a big thing that we can sort of work on figuring out how we can do so in a more energy efficient way, moving towards renewable energy sources. Even in the deserts, cook stoves that are solar powered make a huge difference in terms of emission of different types of gases into the air. And the third way is in the area of transportation, to look at what we transport ourselves in. And part of the Build Back Better package here in DC, the act that is going through past the House, now moving towards the Senate, has to do with conversion to electrical vehicles, especially in countries that have a lot of vehicles. That's an incredible change as well. So we can sort of commit to walk down that path. The problem of World Religion's a second plug, also at the end of their virtual convening, which took place a few weeks ago, did put out a statement that it asked everybody to make a commitment on what they will do personally for Mother Earth and how they will make a difference. So I would invite people to also write down their commitments as a way of seeing how they honor it, and then share it with someone that you love. Say, would you like to make a commitment too? This is in addition to all the organizing, the rallying, the advocacy, and yes, the agitating that needs to continue, because we need to apply the pressure. They say to make a diamond, you need pressure and time. And we want to make a beautiful diamond of all this earth. Problem is we don't have time. So we got to keep up the pressure in all different types of ways to make things beautiful. And at the same time, recognizing the right relationship with Mother Earth is a lived experience by many, but especially of the indigenous peoples. And we need to look at that example more clearly and follow a lot of what it teaches us in our daily lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful, lively, and incredibly informative discussion between the three of you. And I also want to thank our participants. It's wonderful to have so many people with us on this journey. And in particular, I want to thank those that have given donations to help the Temple of Understanding continue our important series. And our next event is going to be on December 17th from 2 to 3. It's called The Climate Urgency, Does Religion Matter? And I believe that all that information will be in the chat. So we hope to see all of you then. And thank you to all of our speakers. It's been a real pleasure being with all three of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Blessings.
Till our life paths cross again, God bless, keep you safe. Looking forward to see you on the front line.